in the heart of Renaissance Rome, where faith and power were two sides of the same tarnished coin. One man's ambition burned brighter and fiercer than any other. This is the story of Giuliano della Rovere, a cardinal whose destiny was not to guide souls to heaven, but to forge an empire on earth. Born into a noble but modest family, Giuliano was a man of immense intellect, unyielding will, and a temper as volatile as the Italian political landscape itself. He navigated the treacherous corridors of the Vatican with a predator's instinct, accumulating wealth, influence, and a network of alliances that made him one of the most powerful men in the College of Cardinals. His ultimate goal was clear to all who dared to look: the papal throne. But in his path stood a formidable obstacle: a family whose name was synonymous with corruption and ruthless ambition. The rivalry between Giuliano della Rovere and Rodrigo Borgia was a clash of titans, a battle for the very soul of the papacy. When the Papal Conclave of 1492 convened, a bitter struggle ensued. Despite Giuliano's considerable influence, Rodrigo Borgia, through masterful bribery and cunning promises, emerged victorious, taking the name Pope Alexander VI. For Giuliano, it was a devastating defeat and a mortal threat. He knew the Borgia Pope would not tolerate a rival of his stature. Accused of treason and facing certain death, Giuliano fled Rome, beginning a long and bitter exile. From the courts of France, he became a shadow kingmaker, a constant thorn in Alexander's side, ceaselessly plotting his downfall and orchestrating political and military maneuvers against the Borgia regime, patiently waiting for the moment to reclaim his destiny. That moment arrived in the summer of 1503 with the sudden death of Alexander VI. As the cardinals gathered for the Papal Conclave, Rome held its breath. The city was a powder keg of rival factions and armed mercenaries. In this maelstrom of chaos and uncertainty, Giuliano della Rovere returned, not as a fugitive, but as the master of the game. He had learned from his past defeat. This time, he eschewed overt force for the subtler arts of diplomacy and deception. He made promises to everyone, assuring the French, the Spanish, and the Italian cardinals that their interests would be protected. He even struck a deal with Cesare Borgia, the late Pope's formidable son, promising to preserve his power in exchange for the votes he controlled. Through a whirlwind of backroom dealings and iron-willed negotiation, he outmaneuvered every opponent, securing a near-unanimous victory in one of the shortest conclaves in history. The final scene of his ascent was not one of pious reverence, but of triumphant power. Crowned as Pope Julius II, he stood before the cardinals who had elected him. The years of exile and struggle had forged him into something more than a priest. His face was a mask of grim determination, his eyes holding not the light of spiritual grace, but the cold fire of a military commander surveying a battlefield. The man who had once fled Rome in disgrace now held its ultimate prize. His reign would not be marked by prayers and sermons, but by cannon and sword. This was the dawn of a new era, the age of the warrior pope. A pontiff who would drench Italy in blood to restore the glory and temporal power of the Church. His story had just begun. In the dawn of the 16th century, a figure unlike any other ascended to the papal throne, a man whose ambition was forged not in prayer, but in the crucible of power and politics. This was Pope Julius II, a pontiff who would trade his pastoral staff for a soldier's sword. Driven by a singular, unyielding vision, his mission was not merely spiritual, it was territorial. From his opulent chambers in the Vatican, Julius II declared a sacred vow that echoed through the halls of power across Italy. The Papal States, fractured and controlled by petty despots and encroaching foreign armies, would be whole again. He framed this campaign of conquest not as an act of aggression, but as a holy duty to God to restore the patrimony of St. Peter and reclaim the authority of the Church. The time for diplomacy had passed. The era of the warrior pope had begun. With his divine mandate declared, Julius II wasted no time. In an unprecedented move that stunned allies and enemies alike, he personally took command of his army. The spectacle of the Vicar of Christ, clad in armor and riding at the head of his troops, was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. His first target was the city of Perugia, held by the ruthless tyrant Giampolo Boglio. As the papal army marched, word of the Pope's personal leadership spread like wildfire. Boglione, a man accustomed to violence and treachery, had prepared for a siege, not a confrontation with the Holy Father himself. Faced with the sight of Julius II's unwavering determination at the city gates, Boglione's nerve broke. The feared despot, intimidated and awestruck, surrendered the city without a single drop of blood being shed. The Pope had won his first victory, not with cannons, but with sheer, indomitable will. The swift capitulation of Perugia only fueled Julius's ambition. His next objective was a far greater prize: the powerful and strategic city of Bologna, ruled by the entrenched Bentivoglio family. This would be no simple show of force. The campaign for Bologna was a true military undertaking, requiring siegecraft, strategy, and sustained assault. The papal army encircled the city, their cannons battering the formidable walls as the citizens braced for a long and brutal conflict. Seeing the writing on the wall and unwilling to face the full wrath of the relentless Pope, the Bentivoglio family gathered their riches and fled into exile, abandoning the city they had ruled for generations. On November 10, 1506, Julius II made his triumphant entry into Bologna, not as a humble pastor, but as a conquering general, solidifying his control over a key piece of the Papal States. The fall of Bologna cemented the Pope's reputation across the continent. He was no longer just the head of the Catholic Church. He was a formidable military and political force to be reckoned with. The final, enduring image of this campaign is one of raw power. Julius II, sword in hand, standing resolute upon the conquered battlements of Bologna, surveying the city he had won through force of arms. It was in this moment that he truly earned his moniker, Il Papa Terrible, the fearsome Pope. This warrior in papal robes had demonstrated that his authority was absolute, backed not only by divine right, but by the cold, hard steel of his army, forever changing the perception of what a pope could be. This was the legacy of Julius II, a man who secured his earthly kingdom with the same fervor he guarded his spiritual one. In the dawn of the 16th century, a storm was gathering over the Italian peninsula, and at its heart was the formidable Republic of Venice. From their lagoon city, the Venetians had woven a vast maritime empire, but their ambition was no longer confined to the sea. Their gaze had turned inward, toward the Italian mainland. On a map in the Vatican, the territories of the Serene Republic spread like a stain, encroaching upon the Papal States, the very patrimony of St. Peter. For Pope Julius II, a man of iron will and worldly ambition, this was an intolerable affront. In his council chambers, the warrior pope argued with fiery conviction. Venice, he declared, with its insatiable hunger for land, threatened not just the Church's domains, but the very balance of power in all of Italy. Their unchecked expansion was a cancer that had to be excised before it consumed the entire body. To confront a power as wealthy and entrenched as Venice, Julius II knew he could not act alone. He needed allies, and so began a masterclass in papal diplomacy. The Pope, casting himself as the aggrieved defender of Italian liberty, reached out to the great powers of Europe, skillfully playing on their own rivalries and ambitions. He dispatched envoys to the court of Louis XII of France, promising him the Lombard cities he had long coveted. He tempted Ferdinand of Aragon with the return of Venetian-held ports in the south. He appealed to the pride of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, offering him dominion over Venetian territories in the Through a web of secret negotiations and promises, Julius II masterfully forged the League of Cambrai in 1508. It was a grand, almost unthinkable, alliance, uniting Europe's bitterest rivals, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire under a single banner, for one singular purpose: the utter dismantlement of the Venetian state. The storm broke in the spring of 1509. The combined might of the League descended upon the Venetian territories with overwhelming force. The Spanish recaptured their southern ports. Imperial troops marched into the Veneto, and papal forces reclaimed the lost cities of the Romagna. But the decisive blow came from the French. On May 14, 1509, at the Battle of Agnadello, the powerful French army, led by King Louis XII himself, shattered the Venetian land forces. The battle was a catastrophe for Venice, their professional army crushed, their commanders killed or captured. News of the stunning victory raced to Rome. In the Vatican, Julius II received the dispatch with triumphant satisfaction. His audacious plan had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. The pride of Venice was broken. Its mainland empire had crumbled in a matter of weeks, and the Papal States were secure. The Republic was humbled, just as he had intended. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of his triumph, a chilling realization began to dawn on the aging Pope. As he stood before his map of Italy, the pieces on the board had shifted once more. Venice, the immediate threat, was now crippled and bleeding. But in its place, a far greater danger had emerged. The red and gold banners of France now flew over Milan and much of northern Italy. His most powerful ally, the very instrument of his victory, had become the new dominant force on the peninsula, a foreign power with a formidable army camped on his doorstep. Julius II's gaze shifted from the diminished lion of St. Mark to the Gallic rooster crowing victoriously in the north. The war against Venice was over, but a new, more perilous conflict was just beginning. The Pope's great game was far from finished. It had all been a game of shifting allegiances, a grand chessboard on which the fate of Italy was decided. But now, for Pope Julius II, the game had changed. Standing on a balcony, the aging pontiff stared grimly at the horizon. The French tricolor, the banner of his once trusted allies, now fluttered defiantly over the conquered city of Milan. This was no longer a political maneuver. It was a sacrilege. In that moment, the warrior Pope found a new and singular purpose. A divine mission whispered into his soul. "Fuori ai Parpari," he declared, his voice a low growl of thunder. "Out with the barbarians." The French, who had helped him crush Venice, were now the serpent in his garden, a foreign pestilence that had to be purged from the sacred soil of Italy, no matter the cost. His war was no longer for territory, but for the very soul of the peninsula. What followed was a diplomatic masterstroke that left the courts of Europe breathless. The ink was barely dry on the treaties that had humbled Venice, yet Julius II, with a pragmatism that bordered on breathtaking cynicism, extended an olive branch to his former foes. He needed their ships, their soldiers, their legendary resilience. In a stunning reversal, he brokered peace with the Venetian Republic, absolving them and welcoming them into a new, formidable coalition. This alliance, sanctified and named the Holy League, was a monster of his own creation. He brought in the calculating Ferdinand of Spain, ever eager to check French power, and the ambitious young Henry VIII of England, hungry for glory on the continent. Once bitter enemies were now united under a single papal banner, their combined might aimed like a holy spear at one target: King Louis XII and his armies in Italy. The campaign began in the brutal grip of winter, a season that tested the resolve of even the most hardened mercenaries. The Holy League's first major objective was the fortress of Mirandola, a key French bastion. As freezing rain turned to heavy snow, the siege became a miserable affair of mud, ice, and disease. Yet, amidst the despair, a figure emerged that defied belief. It was the Pope himself, 68 years old, his white robes splattered with mud, his face raw from the biting wind. He was not in a distant gilded room, but in the filth of the trenches, personally directing the placement of cannons, his voice roaring above the din, urging his troops forward. This image of the aged vicar of Christ, acting as a frontline general, embodied the incredible, terrifying force of will that drove the entire war. He would not be denied his prize. The climax of the war came on Easter Sunday, 1512, on the plains near Ravenna. It was a day of reckoning, one of the bloodiest battles of the age. The French, under their brilliant and daring young commander, Gaston de Foix, the thunderbolt of Italy, unleashed a devastating artillery barrage that tore through the Spanish and Papal lines. The fighting was savage, a maelstrom of steel and blood that raged for hours. Ultimately, French elan and superior firepower won them the field. But the victory came at an unthinkable price. In the final, decisive cavalry charge to shatter the retreating Spanish infantry, Gaston de Foix was cut down and killed. The French had won the battle, but they had lost their leader, their momentum, and their heart. The victory at Ravenna was a Pyrrhic one, so costly and demoralizing that it crippled their campaign. The once mighty French army, leaderless and exhausted, began its long, ignominious retreat back across the Alps. As the last French soldiers disappeared into the mountain passes, Julius II could claim his victory. He had driven the barbarians out. Italy was free from the French, but the land was scarred, and the cost in blood had been immense. For the warrior pope, it was a triumph forged in fire, a testament to a will that could move nations and command armies, leaving a legacy as brilliant and as terrible as the battles he had waged. While history remembers Pope Julius II as the warrior pope, a man who donned armor and led armies, his most enduring legacy was forged not on the battlefield, but in stone and pigment. This is the story of how a pontiff's colossal ambition and iron will reshaped Rome, leaving behind a treasure trove of art that would define the High Renaissance. His reign was a maelstrom of conflict, genius, and divine inspiration, a testament to a man who understood that true immortality could be chiseled and painted into existence. The vision began not with a call to arms, but with a blueprint and a shocking act of destruction. In the heart of Rome, the ancient venerable St. Peter's Basilica had stood for over 1,000 years, a cornerstone of Christendom. Yet, for Julius, it wasn't enough. We see him standing with his chosen architect, Donato Bramante, their eyes fixed on plans for a new basilica, one of unprecedented scale and magnificence. The papal court was aghast. To tear down the sacred resting place of St. Peter himself was considered sacrilege, but Julius was unswayed. He saw a new Rome rising from the old, a capital of the Christian world that would rival the glory of the ancient empire, and he was determined to build its centerpiece, no matter the cost. This unyielding will soon brought Julius into a legendary collision with another titanic personality, Michelangelo. Their relationship was a tempest of creative fire and papal fury. Initially, Julius commissioned the artist to create a tomb for him of staggering proportions, a monument with over 40 life-size statues. But as the Pope's attention and funds were diverted to war and the new St. Peter's, the project faltered, leading to a bitter falling out. Michelangelo, feeling betrayed, fled Rome. Yet, Julius was not a man to be denied. He pursued the artist, eventually forcing a reconciliation and assigning him a task. Michelangelo despised painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The reluctant sculptor, who insisted painting was not his art, was hoisted onto the scaffolding. The work was grueling, and the Pope was impatient. In a moment that has become legend, Julius stormed into the chapel, craning his neck to the heavens and shouting, "When will you make an end of it?" From high above, covered in plaster and paint, Michelangelo retorted, "When I can." In stark contrast to the turbulent drama with Michelangelo, Julius's patronage of another artist was marked by harmony and grace. The young, charming, and prodigiously talented Raphael Santi of Urbino arrived in Rome and quickly won the Pope's favor. While Michelangelo toiled in solitude, Raphael and his bustling workshop moved with serene efficiency, transforming the papal apartments, the stands della Signatura, into a symphony of color and classical ideals. Julius gave the Prince of Painters a free hand, and Raphael responded by creating some of the most beloved masterpieces of the era. The culmination of this work was the School of Athens, a fresco that perfectly embodied the Renaissance synthesis of faith and reason, gathering the greatest minds of antiquity under a grand Roman arch, a vision that mirrored Julius's own ambitions for his papacy. In the end, Julius's gamble paid off. His final years were a testament to the artistic world he had willed into being. As the scaffolding finally came down in the Sistine Chapel, a breathtaking vision was revealed, a divine narrative of creation and judgment that left all of Rome speechless. In the adjacent rooms, Raphael's frescoes glowed with intellectual and spiritual light. The final scene is of an aging Julius II, his days of warfare behind him, standing in the heart of his Vatican palace. He looks up, his gaze sweeping across the vibrant ceilings and walls. The sword had won him temporal power, but it was the brush and the chisel that had secured his immortality. Through his ferocious, unbending patronage, the warrior pope had become the ultimate architect of the High Renaissance. The year is 1512. In the hallowed halls of the Lateran Palace, an old man, frail and racked with illness, presides over the Fifth Lateran Council. This is Pope Julius II, his body weakened by years of relentless campaigning and political strife. Yet, as he speaks, his voice, though strained, resonates with an unwavering firmness. He is no longer the fearsome commander leading armies, but a pontiff consumed with the spiritual health of his church. He pushes for reforms, addressing the corruption and complacency that have taken root. For a man who spent his pontificate carving out a kingdom on earth, his final act is a desperate, passionate plea for the salvation of the church, a testament to his concern for a legacy that would extend beyond temporal power and military conquest. He was securing its future, not with the sword, but with the word. Just a few months later, in February 1513, the Titan fell. Pope Julius II died not in a hail of cannon fire on a muddy battlefield, but quietly in his bed at the Apostolic Palace. The man who had terrorized Italy, who had made kings and cardinals tremble, met his end in the stillness of his chambers. His reign was over. As news of his death spread through Rome, a surprising wave of grief washed over the city. This was the city he had ruled with an iron fist, a place where fear often outweighed affection. Yet now, the people mourned. They lined the streets, paying their respects to the pontiff who had restored their city's pride, secured its borders, and transformed it into the heart of the Renaissance. He had been a ruler of awe, and in his absence, that awe turned to a profound, complex sense of loss. His legacy is a study in contradiction, a dual image etched into the annals of history. On one side, we see the warrior pope, clad in armor, personally leading his troops into the fray at Mirandola, directing cannon fire from the trenches, a general more than a priest. His ambition was worldly, his methods brutal. He was a force of nature who bent the Italian peninsula to his will, a true successor to the Caesars of old. But then, the image shifts. We are no longer on the battlefield, but gazing up at the transcendent beauty of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a masterpiece he compelled a reluctant Michelangelo to create. We stand before the monumental foundations of the new St. Peter's Basilica, a project of such audacious scale it could only be born from his immense vision. This was the patron of the Renaissance, the man who harnessed the greatest artistic talents of his age to glorify God and immortalize his own reign. Was he more Caesar or St. Peter? The question hangs over his memory, a paradox of violence and beauty, power and piety. Julius II's story is a complex tapestry of faith, war, and art. If you want to unravel more powerful legacies from history, subscribe to our channel. Like this video if you learned something new, and tell us in the comments who we should cover next.